Okay, so this is going out live on. Yeah, even the coach says, "What's happening?" Uh-oh, I have an issue here. Just
it said live stream and then disappeared.
Well, I've got the preferences set wrong here. There. Now it should be okay. My problem is that if I set it on the stereo mic, it gives me both the YouTube and yours and my conversation, and so I have to set it on headphones on the computer with the headphones plugged in that I'm not listening to. Then I can hear our conversation.
Right, you don't have that delay from the YouTube.
Yep. Okay. Good morning. Wow, we had 7 people waiting for us right away, and I did send out a notice of this to 200 people, but apparently most people don't want to get up at this hour on a Sunday morning, and me, I don't blame them, but and I'm sure you don't want to get up at 7 or be online at 7, but anyway.
Oh, it's fine. It's become ritual. I just set my alarm for 5:55 to give myself time to wake up slowly. Sometimes I eat breakfast before, sometimes afterwards. This morning I was just, no, that seems like a hassle. I'm just gonna make some coffee.
Right. Okay, so today Jordan and I are going to comment on, and if anybody else comes, any other panelists come, we will have them comment as well on how do you live your life. And there's some quite good advice in Dr. Jung's letters, and so I thought I would do it. And so the 3 letters here, I'm going to read each letter and then we'll comment on it. And so Jordan, you can just close your eyes and just sort of zone into the letter. Okay, this is Jung. I'm taking this, by the way, from a website called The Marginalian. It has been, for the last 15 years, it's been called Brain Pickings. And it's been a very good website for many years. It's published by Maria Popova, and it's her labor of love. And she's now changing the name from Brain Pickings to the Marginalia, the Marginalian. So I guess she's considering herself on the margins. And what she does is select key writings of others to talk about each week. And it's quite good. I recommend it. Go to the Marginalian or Brain Pickings, formerly Brain Pickings.
So as the Marginalian with the title, she would be the Jungian Mandalorian. So
yeah, something like that.
Question is, does she wear a cape, or is she more like Catwoman and needs no cape?
Oh, she's certainly like a superhero because she has no help. Like, well, I do have help because I have Jordan coming with me.
And I just generally need help. So
okay, so this is Carl Jung on how to live and the origin of do the right thing. Do the next right thing. Do the next right thing. Okay, so here's the first letter. In recent seasons of being, I have occasion to reflect on the utterly improbable trajectory of my life, plotted not by planning, but by living. We long to be given the next step and the route to the horizon, allaying our anxiety with the illusion of a destination somewhere beyond the vista of our present life. But the hardest reality to bear is that death is the only horizon, with numberless ways to get there. None replicable, all uncertain in their route, all only certain to arrive. This is why there are infinitely many kinds of beautiful lives. And this is why each and every one of them, even the most seemingly actualized, trembles with a staggering degree of doubt and confusion. Certainly it is the price of beauty and integrity, the only compass for the territory of uncertainty that constitutes the land mass of any given life. I'll read that sentence again. Uncertainty is the price of beauty, and integrity the only compass for the territory of an uncertainty that constitutes the landmass of any given life. And so the best we can do is walk step by step, step by next intuitively right step, until one day, pausing to catch our breath, we turn around and gasp at a path. If we have been lucky enough, if we have been willing enough to face the uncertainty, it is our own singular path, unplotted by our anxious younger selves, untrodden by anyone else. The recovery community has a shorthand for keeping this at the center of awareness in times of inner turmoil. Do the next right thing. The concept, in fact, originated 2 years before the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous in a lucid and large-hearted letter Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung wrote to an anonymous correspondent, included in selected letters of C.G. Jung, 1909 to 1961. Okay, so that's the first one. Comments, Jordan?
I'll go kind of backwards. The last piece that really stuck out, uncertainty is the price of beauty. Yeah. And I live my life comfortable with the not knowing while daily getting things done. So the not knowing ends up being that formless eros, but the getting things done gives me form and shape to pour it into. Sometimes it doesn't need to be poured. And what's interesting, to do the next right thing, what really resonates there about that is that it gives you the assumption that you're not starting right now. So you're not starting over. It's your whole life up to this point, and do the next right thing. And I think that's critically important for people, because when he says life plotted not by planning, but by living, there's the comfortability with the not knowing and turning around, or just turning to, find those 3 stacked stones, the new cairn on a trailhead, except there's no trail. So it's for you to blaze it. Right. And you go your own way. And death is the only horizon was stuck out too.
So Jordan, a year ago, you were living in Philadelphia. Right. Is that right? A year ago, yes. You were living in Philadelphia. You had a beautiful German Shepherd dog, and
130-pound goddess.
Right. And now you're living in Taos, New Mexico. And so obviously you have stepped down that path in the last 1 year. And so I wonder if you would just recount sort of the high points of that trip, from, living, you and I have been communicating for perhaps 3 years now, I guess. And the first 2 of those, you were living in Philadelphia. And in the first 2 of those, I never remember.
Actually, it was September of last year.
Is that all? It just seems like a long time.
That's all. It feels like we packed so much into it, so much living into it. Yeah, the high point synopsis. I mean, to give kind of a précis of, it's interesting. I had in 2015, I took a 5-year break. I'd closed my architecture firm down in 2014. Fired it out the front door when I realized, tarot sessions and astrology were actually keeping my doors open for the last 2 quarters. They had tarot reader in me looked at the architect and said, now who has the real job? And I realized in that moment, I had bias. No one had told me that. And that was me kind of playing, the mamas don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys, doctors and lawyers and such.
Right.
But so I took a 5-year radio silence that I called the long road home. I took a consulting job with a design build firm in the suburbs of Philadelphia, north, and decided that it was a brainwashing time to take the long road home for me. And in that sense, I became a hermit publicly. But then in January of last year, I woke up and one morning and immediately, I usually try to wake slowly so I don't just, I'm not startled out of bed by a quote unquote alarm clock, and I woke up and went, what am I doing here? And it was a rhetorical question, because rather than questioning it, all that meant to me was that long road home is done. It's over. I'm here inside. And immediately the image that came to me was one from when I was 4 years old, when my dad brought me to Taos. We lived with a herpetologist in their barracks for 2 weeks. But the image it was before a major surgery. So he wanted 2 weeks of beauty and nature before I go into 2 weeks of Mayo Clinic and trauma. And we were fishing. He was fishing. I was watching. But I remember him thumbing the intestines. He cut open the trout, thumbed the intestines, and tossed them. And I just remembered, and I hadn't thought about this since then, just this ochre, orange, yellow intestines just plop in the river, and then watching them as they floated by. And I just went, Taos. I was in Santa Fe for 4.5 years, and it was good, but it just was a little off. I somehow wasn't in just the right place. And so Taos came to mind. And so step by step, I began to call out furniture and books and things to get down to what could be put on, say, 2 pallets. So like 20 some boxes. And I decided to dump deadlines. And in that dumping of deadlines, I realized the architecture of 25 plus years. You'd live under trauma for 2.5 decades. You're always go, go, go. And you can create a false sense of urgency there. And that started to shed. That skin started to go. And I just made my way to, I want to be in Taos at least 5 to 10 days before the summer solstice. So between January and then, I just systematically went through. There was a whole piece of renting a U-Haul truck until one day, after the 3rd time they canceled and tried to reschedule, I just went, enough, you're fired. Do I really want to drive halfway across the country? And the answer was an absolute no. I want to hop on a plane and land in Albuquerque and have a shuttle take me to Taos, period. So I switched tack, called movers. They came and picked everything up, and I landed in Taos on, I think it was June 13th or 14th. So a week before the solstice, and basically just was homeless in a hotel for 6 weeks. And it was one of those, my planning was invest in myself, literally. Pour some of what I've socked away, pour some of that into my liquid, and just allow Taos to either chew me up and spit me out or welcome me. And after about 6 weeks of that, there was I've done this and I moved before. This is starting to become more of a hemorrhage than a throwing money at the problem. I think I'll go to my cabin. And so it's only 50 minutes, 50, just less than an hour away, deck of the cabin at 9,300 feet to Taos. So I just did that, and I was then reading on the plaza, reading Tarot on the plaza 5 days a week or so. And that was the summer, and that was the fall. And then the last highlight, the first thing that should have been there, home. I had been home since January, but I look now that I'm thinking about it, it's probably 6 months to the date where I changed my tack again, from moving truck to calling movers, from trying to find places that kept getting snapped up literally 8 to 15 seconds after they were posted. I mean, you were either right there when it appeared and you took it, or you didn't get it. And I just changed my tack, and I found this place that's a standalone casita next door to the house of the people who own the property. Two great people. There are 8 stray cats they take care of. They have their own whole casita. I mean, it was a converted garage. But so now I'm here. I was home within in January, and now I'm home within my own home here in Taos.
Yeah, cool.
And my mom even commented. She said, "I don't see you as happy anymore." She said, "I feel joy every time I talk to you. You're doing exactly what you want to do and in the right place." And she made a comment. She said, "Do what you love and everything else will follow." And she said, "But now I'm watching you for the last 6 months. It's do what you love in the right place at the right time." She said, "The discernment's in there, and it's not such an oopy loopy statement anymore." And she goes, "I'm just loving watching it play out."
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a very positive thing, obviously, for you. I've observed it very clearly, and I think many others have. Just for the record, ladies and gentlemen, Jordan is the first official invitee to our confluence. He was waiting at the door while Tim put the website together for us, and so I'm gonna, on the YouTube channel, I'm just gonna give the URL for our confluence for next summer, in case you want to join us.
Yeah, and I hopped right on, paid in full, and also everyone too. It is a living work in progress, like any creative thing. And so if you find anything that is problematic in terms of clicking or working, just please do let Tim Holmes know. And that way, because he's right there on the ready to tune and tailor, as once it's live, we really know if we have tires on the car or not.
Well, it is live now, and so we are accepting applications for an invitation. The event is invitation only, and there will only be 30 people besides the presenters themselves present, and we're about 10 of us, including our documentary maker and our spouses. There are 10 of us, so it's going to be about 40 people, but only 30 will be invited. And so if you wish to attend, you have to go to that website and let us know what you think you might bring to the party, because we're in a process. We didn't know we were in a process. I mean, originally, the way this came up was last May, or actually February 15th of last year, I got a prostate cancer diagnosis. And the very first thing that came to my mind when I got that diagnosis, obviously cancer is not a good word to hear in a diagnosis, it was I should ask Tim to paint my portrait. And I knew that it wouldn't be real unless I went to Helena to have Tim do it. So in May 7th, of last year, or no, May 6th of last year, I got on an airplane from Baltimore and flew out to Helena, Montana, to spend one day with Tim Holmes. And so, wow, it was a numinous day. It was an amazing day. And, I couldn't even begin to tell you, you had to be there. But in any case, that was the 7th of May. And the very next day, the 8th, I got on a plane in Helena and flew back to Baltimore. And all the way back, I had this muse of mine kicking me in the back, putting her knee into my back, as Tim's image shows, telling me something's going to happen from this. And so on the morning of May 9th, I started to send a series of text messages to Tim, and I suggested that we bring together some sort of conference in Helena, in his studio, a year hence. And at the time, I thought it was just a way to draw people from outside Helena into his studio. And I didn't think much more of it than that at that point. But we started to call it the Creator's Art, a confluence of art renewal, art, psychology, and renewal. And in the process, something changed. Okay, and instead of being an event, it became a process. And so in early November, I flew out to California to spend a weekend with the other 6 or the other 5 presenters. And again, that was, oh my God, that was an amazing experience. And all of us came away from it just completely renewed and just with a completely different perspective on life. And we realized that, not only were we going to have a confluence of these things, art, psychology, and renewal, next summer, but it's already happening. And it has been happening since May 7th when I was with Tim. And so we really recognized that we had something. And so it's just been a continuing journey and sort of the same story as Jordan's, in a little bit different container. And
I was just going to say that because, there was a certain amount of misery associated with me waking up and going, done. I was miserable there, but I had put myself there. And then you get the prostate cancer diagnosis, and basically neither of us wasted trouble. We faced it and made diamonds out of misfortune. Right. And I've found a word through this. I used to always talk about the discipline of the ritual. Train hard and long enough so that the mind forgets and the body remembers. But this reversed that, where if the body doesn't pour the heart up through the thought, if there's no heart of the matter, what's the point? And the word I found to substitute for discipline was blisscipline. And that just struck, the diamonds out of misfortune. Great.
That's a good word. I like that word.
And then a friend of mine's 4-year-old reinforced that when she indignantly at her birthday said, well, where's the cake? Oh, well, we're going to do things differently this year. She goes, what's the point? It's a birthday. And, the judge walks in the room, basically knocks down the gavel and says, dismiss, can't argue with that. Where's her cake? Yeah. But it became just that, the 4-year-old of, if the heart of the matter is not present, what's the point? And I started to then navigate by things that were just fish scales, shedded snake skins. Those are rocks in the river. Paddle around them. Don't run into them. Don't wrestle them. Don't even play with them. Maybe rest on them sometimes, but just that. What's the point? There's no birthday cake for the 4-year-old at the birthday party, and it was just so clear and so simple. And I laugh that I love that I was inspired by a 4-year-old after the fact, because there's no filter, but it's straight out of the mouths of babes in a way, in one of those times where it makes all kinds of sense and it makes all kinds of nonsense that works.
Yeah, that's very good. I'm taking notes here. Blissful. I really like that word.
Yeah, my question is, do I include the C after the SS, or do I lose the C and it's just bliss and then IPL? So that's a minor detail.
I mean, that's really the essence of everything we've been talking about, because you said SS and I go, oh yeah, this is like the difference between living in Nazi Germany where the trains ran on time, or living your own life.
Right.
And so I love that. That's very good. The difference.
And it's not mine. I don't know where I found it, but I came across it probably reading someone's blog somewhere. But yeah, Blisscipline. It was like, wow, that word's got legs.
Yeah. Now let me just mention further, because we've read this letter earlier in this session. This is the letter that ultimately led to the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous. And Dr. Jung did not know for 30 years that he had been instrumental in the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous, but it is this letter, which was written to, I think it's Roland H. is the anonymous name. He had written this letter to Roland H., and it changed his life. And then Roland H. told the story to Bill W., who was the actual founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it wasn't until very near his death in around 1960 or so that Dr. Jung that Bill W. wrote to Dr. Jung and told him about how he had been instrumental in the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I think that because this is so significant and so significant to addiction, which is a big problem for us now, I guess I'll read this letter once more and then go on to the next letter without further comment. But it's an important letter, and everybody should hear it. So,
well, one thing too, before you go into that, the one thing I think it stands out, the importance of legacy, not even for immortality, but for community service, because then he's not even aware that something he did sidebarred into a major contribution to the emotional well-being of so many people. And just that life plotted not by planning, but living, it gives people that permission so they can get off their tormentor parents, so to speak, and traumas, and just own that it's fine to live. You don't have to show your work and prove everything all the time and basically explain it away. Right. So giving people the sandbox back of, what did you do as a kid that moved you so much in life? Go do that, he would say.
And I had a similar experience where a colleague of mine who's 15 years younger than me, but he was my business partner for many years, and I still consider him my partner and hope to do business with him again. But he's an Indian man, and he and I both lost our life savings and everything in the crash in 2008, and we were partners at that time, and we went down in flames because of that crash. And a little while ago, within the last 6 months, he told me that something I did in 1996, believe it or not, was providing the cash flow that put food on the table for his parents today. Still put
Wow.
food on the table for his parents. And of course, India is a much rougher place to get back on your feet if you, if you
Yeah.
lose your business and so on. And so I found that very gratifying. And of course, that was something I did 25 years ago in similar vein that today is putting food on the table for his parents.
Yeah, and there's a nice synchro mesh there with the gears between what Jung did in that letter and what created alcohol. It was the impetus for creating Alcoholics Anonymous. Yeah. And then what you did that then completely unaware then created a support system for his family. And that's big stuff. And I find that there's that wonderful humility that's not going around taking CV, curriculum vitae, resume notes on, oh, look at all the good stuff I've done. It's no, live your life, do the next right thing. And you're not cataloging the attaboys because that becomes egotistical and becomes miserly in a way. You're not really doing service then, you're just playing service to yourself. So that whatever you had done, creates a calculus that extends itself into the future. That's a living action. That's something that it was born and it graduated from you and it took off and did other things.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to read this initial letter from Alcoholics Anonymous again, then I'll take a look at comments, and then I'm going to go back to the second letter. So, okay. So this was the first letter again, in case you missed it earlier in this session. In recent seasons of being, I have occasion to reflect on the utterly improbable trajectory of my life, plotted not by planning, but by living. We long to be given the next step and the route to the horizon, allaying our anxiety with the illusion of a destination somewhere beyond the vista of our present life. But the hardest reality to bear is that death is the only horizon, with numberless ways to get there, none replicable, all uncertain in their route, all only certain to arrive. This is why there are infinitely many kinds of beautiful lives. And this is why each and every one of them, even the most seemingly actualized, trembles with a staggering degree of doubt and confusion. Uncertainty is the price of beauty, and integrity the only compass for the territory of uncertainty that constitutes the landmass of any given life. And so the best we can do is walk step by step by next intuitively right step, until one day, pausing to catch our breath, we turn around and gasp at a path. If we have been lucky enough, if we have been willing enough to face the uncertainty, it is our own singular path, unplotted by our anxious younger selves, untrodden by anyone else. The recovery community has a shorthand for keeping this at the center of awareness in times of inner tumult. Do the next right thing. The concept, in fact, originated 2 years before the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous in a lucid and large-hearted letter Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung wrote to an anonymous correspondent. Okay, and it's included in selected letters. It must be volume 1. But there is a book called Carl Jung and Alcoholics Anonymous that is really worth reading. And I urge you, if you are having issues with addiction of any kind, I urge you to read that book.
If you look at the satellites too, because then he did not create Alcoholics Anonymous, but he was the impetus for its inspiration to be implemented. Then you take the mother-daughter pair who took his work and created the Myers-Briggs. I mean, they're now that I'm thinking about it, I mean, I haven't done a survey of all the large things we utilize that were inspired by Jung, which makes me even more surprised that not as many people are aware of him. So there's kind of a humility to his history.
Yeah, I'm going to leave out the accolades from Miles to you, which you can read on YouTube.
Thank you, Miles.
Yeah, but Penelope says that when I was talking about 2008, that was when Pluto moved into Capricorn. 2009, leaves there in 2024, the great fall. Oh, wonderful, Penelope. Thank you for that. USA is having its Pluto return February 2022. Miles says, in Eros, just do the next great thing. Okay, so that's
well, actually, to speak to Penelope's astrological comment too, there's a Pluto Uranus square characteristic that's occurring. The Grand Cross already occurred, I believe, but there's what I call the Empire cycle. It's approximately 237 to 264 years, averages out to about 250. And if you look at the empires throughout time, the only ones that lasted more than 250 years typically lasted in modules of 250 years, where if they did not basically stop and redefine, reevaluate, and recalibrate, so their business, so to speak, the business of the country, they fell. And the U.S. is in that place where there's big change afoot, and if initiated and implemented, then you don't waste the trouble of the Pluto cycle, and you actually capitalize on it to transform, which is Pluto is the great transformer, and then Uranus is the great shaker upper. So we see that right now in everyday society, these things happening, foundations being shaken to crumble, to then churn them under and get out the rototiller and replant the garden.
So what is your reaction to this comment? USA is having its Pluto return February 2022.
Yeah, and that's just what that is. And so what happens in a Pluto return, people never have a Pluto return because you have, I think, a 274-year orbit. So far, only Yoda in the movies would get a Pluto return. We don't live long enough to get one, but that's what countries do. So in their Pluto return, that to me is where I came up with what I call the Empire cycle, and astrologically, and it's just that at the Pluto return comes basically the big rite of passage at the scale of a country level.
Well, we're definitely having that and a rebirth, what one can hope.
And this happened, I mean, you get a lot of this with the square pieces around World War II. I mean, you get a lot of rise and fall.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah. And Penelope takes the position it's 248 years.
248, yeah, that's correct.
So what's going to come after the Pluto return then? What's that? That's the question. Okay, I'm going to move on though.
Yeah, after the Pluto return, we should do the next best thing.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, and she's right on the orbit. I think I dyslexically was thinking 247 and said 274 at the outside. It is 248, I believe.
Yeah. Well, and Miles says Pluto returned, then the confluence. That will be interesting. Yes, indeed. That's.
We'll be planting the new seeds in the garden.
That's right. And so transformation. Penelope says, yes, birth, death, transformation. We are definitely going to give everybody who comes to the confluence, plus everyone that sees the documentary level later, a renewal. And I just wanted to recommend everybody's watching. It's going to be on again tonight, I think, at 10 o'clock. Is a documentary about an artist named J.R. excuse me, who has created a documentary called Paste and Glue. And what he did, he won, I don't know if he won the Academy Award or was nominated a few years ago. But anyway, what he did was go into very, very impoverished places, particularly the barrios of Rio de Janeiro, but he went into several of them. Oh, and he also did this with people at the Supermax penitentiary in Tehachapi, California, which is in the Mojave Desert. He did some amazing changes in the attitude of people at these places. And what he did was he put eyes, huge eyes, across the landscape by painting them onto buildings and faces of people. And so he gave the people who were highly impoverished a new attitude about life. And these eyes were definitely looking down at everybody else. And so you can probably find it if you look on YouTube, but it's going to be rebroadcast tonight, I think, at 10 o'clock. And it's not on one of the major stations, so you'll have to look at it. But it's tremendous piece of work. And the artist goes by the name J.R. Okay, I'm going to read the next letter. On December 15th, 1933, Jung responded to a woman who had asked his guidance on, quite simply, how to live. 2 generations after the young Nietzsche admonished that, quote, no one can build you the bridge on which you and only you must cross the river of life, unquote. Jung writes, Dear Frau V, your questions are unanswerable because you want to know how one ought to live. One lives as one can. There is no single definite way for the individual which is prescribed for him or would be the proper one. If that's what you want, you had best join the Catholic Church, where they tell you what's what. Moreover, this way fits in with the average way of mankind in general. But if you want to go your individual way and live your life, it is the way you make for yourself, which is never prescribed, which you do not know in advance, and which simply comes into being of itself when you put one foot in front of the other. If you always do the next thing that needs to be done, you will go most safely and sure-footedly along the path prescribed by your unconscious. Then it is naturally no help at all to speculate about how you ought to live. And then you know, too, that you cannot know it, but quietly do the next and most necessary thing. So long as you think you don't yet know what this is, you still have too much money to spend in useless speculation. But if you do with conviction the next and most necessary thing, you are always doing something meaningful and intended by fate. With kind regards and wishes, yours sincerely, C.G. Jung.
The Catholicism comment had me kind of roll in there because they'll tell you what to do. So Catholicism, rather than more catechism, how about more cowbell? It's like
Right. Well, the thing that we definitely want to say on a Jung website is that if you want to live your life, you're going to have to live it yourself and not follow anybody else's rules. So,
and I think that don't waste trouble piece is so important, because if you make shame walk the plank, then despair and anxiety are usually tied to his ankles, and you start to then become unthreatened. And when you're unthreatened, you don't get triggered as much or at all. I should say as much, because there are always things. But I think what happens then when you're unthreatened, you listen more deeply, because you're able to be strong enough to be gentle, fierce enough to be compassionate. You muted. So let's get stepped away for just a little bit. I think this is a time when we were all together in an important time. I look at milestones in the moment that we experience in life. When you catch yourself finding 3 new stack stones, there's no trail behind them, but there's a trailhead, and so it's yours to make and blaze the trail. I think we all have experienced those in life, but I feel like there's a community trail for us to blaze together. And I think that Skip and I each week here on Sundays are putting to do our damnedest those Jungian ideas out there that are very much living. And I laughed at, Freud was a genius, but it was empirical. He wanted to find a reason and explain everything. And that to me is appealing more to a mentor, tormentor. It's one of those, which parent are you still processing, or which mentor? Whereas Jung wanted you to live your own life. He didn't want a client lifelong. He wanted to teach you how to do it yourself. So I find that now, especially as Penelope brought up, February 22nd, the Pluto return for the United States and its natal birth chart is occurring. So it's people can spout a lot of doom and gloom astrologically and with tarot, even with psychology. But I find that that's the doom and gloom versions do a disservice to society, because that's just saying that the reader or the therapist does not go beyond that to the time to do something is when there's trouble. Don't waste it and find the treasure. So as you're coming back, I just made an analogy between, milestones in the moment in our personal lives, all of us in the world, and that we're in a larger scale milestone in the moment culturally across the world, and not just in our country.
Yeah, very definitely. Okay. Sorry. Moving on. I'm not ill, by the way.
Yes.
I have to tell you about my my quick trip to the ER on Friday, but first we have to do this. And so anyway,
All good.
All right. So 2 months later, in another gesture of generosity and wisdom, Jung deepens the sentience in a letter to a man who had reached out in abject anxiety and distress, feeling that he had quite simply mislived his life. Jung writes, "Dear Herr N., nobody can set right a mismanaged life with a few words, but there is no pit you cannot climb out of, provided you make the right effort at the right place. When one is in a mess like you are, One has no right anymore to worry about the idiocy of one's own psychology, but must do the next thing with diligence and devotion and earn the goodwill of others. In every littlest thing you do in this way, you will find yourself. Everyone has to do it the hard way, and always with the next, the littlest, and the hardest things. Yours truly, C.G. Jung.
Mm-hmm. You can't mislive your life. And it reminds me of a painting I sold, and someone said, but how is that thing $3,600? It's only 4 foot by 4 foot. And I hear your neighbors told me it took you 2 hours. I said, oh, no, that's the Saturday afternoon time frame, 1:30 to 3:30, that it came onto the canvas, but it didn't take 2 hours. It took my whole life up to that point. She whipped out her checkbook. What it was because I was unthreatened and I was just there. All she was doing is poking, prodding me to see if she didn't want to buy art from people who she couldn't invite to her dinner parties. She didn't want boring dolts of artists who would, wax on, and she wanted someone who had some zip to them. And so I didn't realize, but she told me, she goes, yeah, I don't want to buy art from boring people because I'd like to invite you to the holiday party if you're not. So,
yeah.
but that kind of person, if you can't mislive your life, there's the no pit you cannot climb out of if you make the right action in the right place. To me, it's your whole life up to that point. But I would add what Alan Watts said: you have no responsibility to be who you were even 5 minutes ago. Right. And then Joan Didion, to second that with, or in her own way, I have lost touch with several people I used to be. And
assuredly. And
what happens is, right at that point, to climb out of that pit, just lose touch with that person you used to be, because now you're about to take the rest of your life into your life up to that point.
Right. And so I say to my fellow Americans, if this America is not what you had in mind, then let's make it something better. And will all pitch in and do it together. We'll all pitch in and do it together. And
people comment on things like that about, well, what about disagreements and civil wars? And I find that if we can be mature and old enough, grown up enough to be that 4-year-old who sees what's the point, then there's dignity and difference. We can listen regardless of whether we agree and see how we can mesh even contradictory gears to keep something in motion that provides value for pretty much everyone.
Right. And the thing is that we've been sold a country of violence, and that we are constantly at one another's throats. And that's not the case at all. I mean, you leave your house and go to the grocery store or the drugstore, and one of the trials of that is it's boring. Boy, their grocery stores are pretty much the same everywhere in the country, and even the same brands, right? And the same with the drugstore. And if you go into one, you pretty much go out into the mall. And there's nobody running around with semi-automatic weapons. And so what we saw recently, when this young man decides to go into his high school and kill 4 people and wound 7, and then his parents get also arrested. Wow, did they deserve that? What immaturity caused those parents to think it was a good idea for their 15-year-old son to have a semi-automatic pistol. And
with that too, the thing about guns, rifles are for hunting. Handguns, all of them, it's automatic or semi, they're not for hunting. And so that's that. you give someone a 30-06, they have to learn how to use it. You give someone a handgun and they can just go off the handle.
Right. And people who call hunting for a deer with a semi-automatic or automatic weapon sport, where is the sport in that? You know, I mean, there is sport in bow hunting. I'll grant you that.
Right.
You know, in bow hunting, you actually have to have some skill. But where is the sport in hunting for a deer with a semi-automatic weapon?
Yeah, that would be like trying to be efficient by taking a Gatling gun out and, you know, cutting down the trees and the deer at the same time, so you have firewood and meat. I mean, it's not a good thing to do. It takes no skill.
Right.
Just a crank, you know.
Okay, so Penelope has said a beautiful thing, pain and rebirth and a higher consciousness. Ganderstein says, earlier I thought you mentioned astrology. I find it interesting that there's a constellation named Corona Borealis, and within that constellation is a star named Omicron Coronae Borealis.
Yeah, there are so many other things that deserve the Omicron name than that variant.
Yeah, and there were.
I mean, it literally means cell, but at the same time, I mean, astrologically and linguistically, I think they should have stuck with a different word for the letter O.
Right, and Gander also says, I had throughout life experienced higher consciousness, but never had a name for it. That's a difference between admiring a flower and realizing you're admiring it. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, and that's living the higher self. That is, rather than planning it.
What, you know, the higher consciousness is within us, and you know, the problem is we all experience it one way or another, but the church has said, oh no, that, you know, that's, don't pay any attention to that. The higher consciousness is out there. And that's not true at all. Okay, the higher consciousness is within you. And
well, that's just like the news. You know, if they get all hot and bothered about, oh, look over there, I just turned 180 degrees, look the other way and go, what are you trying to get me to miss? You know, because there's something calm and meaningful over there, and not this, you know, chatterbox of news feed keeping everyone trauma.
And so I think my point here too is partially this idea that and this comes from Lawrence Jaffe's book, Liberating the Heart, Spirituality and Jungian Psychology. But there's one sentence in here that really sums up everything, and that is, the purpose of Jung's whole psychology is to make accessible to us that healing power which resides in our unconscious. Okay, to make accessible to us that healing power which resides in our unconscious. And so the point about prayer is that it is a petition to your unconscious. And if you understand it as a petition, then it opens up your unconscious and gives you an answer. Now, you may not like that answer. That's a possibility. But nonetheless, your unconscious is the boss. And so if you don't like that answer and you don't follow it, you're going to find yourself, you know, tripping over a rock someplace and falling down.
What's interesting about prayer too, Dr. Larry Dossey did a lot of work with prayer, has some pretty wonderful books, and titles aren't coming to mind right now, but there's basically he approached it similar to Alan Watts, whereas prayer should not be a petition. I want this or I want that. Prayer should be a life-affirming spirituality where your very breath is a prayer in every moment. And that's again, the living rather than the planning. It's not letters to, God being the adult version of Santa Claus. It's, I here's my letter. I'd like this for Christmas. I mean, the prayers become those deep, higher consciousness places where looking at the flower versus being aware of that I really appreciate that statement there in the comments. Because that's a life affirming spirituality that's occurring without having to beat it to death with meaning.
Right. And there's a book called Sacred Chaos by Francoise O'Kane. And it's not in print anymore, but it is available in my Dropbox, at least in the advanced reading group Dropbox, if not in the main Dropbox. And it really talks about the chaos that is around us is truly sacred, because without having things to draw into ourselves to then use our logical function,
right,
and turn it to our purposes, then we don't have anything. And so that's why I wear this bracelet that my wife gave to me last Christmas time, which was, if not the best Christmas present I ever got. I think it is the best Christmas present.
Yeah, that Ouroboros, that I remember when you first got that, your eyes were, you might as well have been 4 years old and got exactly what you wanted for Christmas. I mean, because there was just so much glee that.
Right. And the point of this is that everything around us is chaos, and we are living our lives, and we're drawing from that chaos and turning it to our purposes, each one of us, always. And
and I think I associate the word chaos also with the word capital N, nature. Nature needs no order. Nature has no emotions. It simply has weather, and the weather will always wash through. You can, everyone who listening today has 100% bat 1,000 track record of getting through their life up to this point and getting through every problem that's ever come, whether they stepped around them or worked through them. So, I mean, it's important, I think, for people to give themselves credit for how much they have done rather than what they have not yet done.
Yeah. And so Edward Edinger, at one point, you can find my reading of this. It's the 7 petitions of the Lord's Prayer. And it's describing what the petitions are that the Lord's Prayer represents. And so I don't know if I can do justice to Dr. Edinger, but if I put this out there, maybe Jordan and I can work some of it out. But our Father who art in heaven, well, everybody thinks heaven's out there somewhere, but heaven isn't out there somewhere. It's right here. It's in our attitude toward life. And if you're going to be immortal, you better do something in this life that makes you immortal, because after you're dead, there's no more acting. And so, Jesus Christ did things which certainly made him immortal. So did the Buddha, so did many others, but so did Beethoven and Alexander Solzhenitsyn and many others. And
when Beethoven, that's, if we pull that out of the mix just for a second,
sure.
Beethoven went deaf.
Right.
Well, that's not, I mean, for a musician, that's like an artist going blind. I mean, and that's some serious hassle. That's some serious trouble. I mean, that's detrimental. But did his career go away? No. You know what he did? he sawed the legs off of his piano so it sat on the floor and he could feel it in his buttocks. He could feel the music coming through him, literally. So he still composed some of the best music after he was deaf, and maybe even better, because he was immersed in the experience. But I love that. No, my career's not over. Just saw the legs off, and we'll put the percussion on the floor, and I'll feel it, and I'll know what I'm doing. So I mean, that's another don't waste trouble. Life plotted by living. He didn't plan to go deaf.
So the next petition, hallowed be thy name, which is recognizing that the chaos is bringing us what we need. Mother Earth brings us what we need every day. And we have to appreciate it. Thy kingdom come, which is, it's us that's going to create the heaven on earth. And even in the Apocrypha, Jesus Christ said, heaven is spread upon the earth and men do not see it.
And thy kingdom come would be an allusion to the creative wellspring.
Yeah. And thy will be done. Thy will be done. Okay. Which is
the next right thing. It's like,
to the next right thing. And as we keep saying on this YouTube channel, you're not going to beat your unconscious. Your unconscious is the boss. And so if something tells you to do something, I guess you better do it. And
there's kind of a Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers gig with the unconscious, because one or the other, you or it, needs to know how to dance backwards and probably in heels or some difficulty. I mean, there's a synchronization with a dignity and difference. They're not doing the same thing. They're flowing in a balance.
Yeah. I just use the example of how to work out, what I had to do was work out how to stay alive during the Vietnam War, because all of my generation was being either drafted or was going into the military or was going someplace else, to Canada or something. And my instinct, which was contrary to everybody else at my college, was to join the Marine Corps and go into an officer program in the Marine Corps. Now, I actually wanted to join the Navy, but at that time, that road was blocked to me because my vision was poor, and so the Navy was being very persnickety about what your vision should be to go to an officer program. Some of my high school classmates, we were all, for the most part, we were Navy juniors. Most of my high school classmates joined the Navy as enlisted men, but I didn't want to do that. I was raised by a naval officer, and I wanted to be a naval officer. And I couldn't get into the Naval Academy because my father wouldn't show me the ropes as his father had done for him. And so I think my father didn't want me to, go to the Naval Academy, because he could easily have shown me the same ropes that he used, but he didn't do. And so the result of that was he thought he was keeping me out of the military, but what it caused me to do was join the Marines, which wasn't his plan, right?
A little bit of a parenting whack-a-mole. You put the kid, he's going to come up over here.
And I took that option because they were going to allow me to go to graduate school for 2 years. and then come on active duty as a first lieutenant. And that seemed like a good option, that geez, I'll put off going on active duty for 2 years and maybe the war will be over by then. That was my thinking, right? But oh, by the way, in February of my senior year, Ted 68 came along, and by then I had earned the right to be commissioned. And the Marine Corps wrote to me and said, oh no, you're not going to graduate school. You're coming on active duty in June. And, and you'll be in basic school the same day the guys from the Naval Academy are going to be. And, and if you don't choose to do this, then you can decline your commission and you'll be back in the draft. And so here's the choice. Do you want to be a Marine Corps officer? Or do you want to be a private in the Army?
Yeah.
and
no choice.
Choice that's no choice. But
you want to pick the gold nugget or the lump of coal. I mean, right. It's no disparaging on any private in the Army. I mean, that's still service, but right. Just from if you're given this choice of those two,
these were my choices as the son of a naval officer, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, one thing led to another, and sure enough, I put off going to Vietnam for 2 more years because instead of going to civilian graduate school, I went to the Marine Corps
OCS.
School.
Yeah.
Well, I had been to OCS, but I went to the basic school, and then I went to artillery school, and then I went to language school for Mandarin Chinese, which was a 1-year program. And so I never got to Vietnam until 25 months after I graduated, which meant that I had achieved my objective in a backhanded way. And so, but always I just did what instinctually came to me. And so I ended up going to Vietnam as an interrogator, or an interrogation officer per se, and as a camp commander, as a prisoner of war camp commander. And so
what's interesting, what just came to me when you're saying that you did what instinctually came to you, and you have Bollingen right behind you. Jung is an architect. He did what instinctually came to him about home. I mean, so there's very much a similarity there.
Yeah. So anyway, we're in the Lord's Prayer though. So that thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Well, as above, so below, except the above is in here, right? And
the firmament would actually be the limits of each of our boundaries rather than some cloud base up high.
And exactly.
Or our identities.
Right. And, I think people don't understand this well, but why does astrology work? Okay, so Jordan, this is a sort of a trick question for you, but you're an astrologer.
It's one of my favorites.
Favorite question. Yeah,
it's one of my favorites. How does tarot work? How does astrology work? One thing about astrology, people say, I don't believe in that stuff. And I say, well, I don't either. It makes two of us. I don't believe in astrology any more than I believe in my range or my fridge in the kitchen, but I use them every day to nourish myself. Yeah. So it's a tool. But what I find with planets, it's a little easier to grok oftentimes than tarot for people, because if you just look at it as magnetism, if you look at things in centrifugal force that have an influence or pull, literally, it's like the moon pulls the oceans. So if I start there at that little piece, well, then I look at how does Pluto or Mars or Saturn or Jupiter, Neptune, Mercury, Venus, how do they pull on each other like a giant transmission of gears? Or if you take, say, a Patek Philippe watch, flip it over, open the back, and you see all these little gears of different scales.
Yeah.
It works like that. And what's interesting, that magnetism and that influence of things, if you look at then our solar system in its orbit around the galactic center, which I believe has a 270 million year orbital cycle, then what happens is if you put little streamers on all the planets while you see the sun moving, what happens is all of them create this DNA strand.
Right.
And that's at a large scale. That's what we are too. So, the as above, so below, the microscopic, the macroscopic, the small and the large, the Atman, pronounced properly this time. But the larger than large and smaller than small, which then jumps over to then how does tarot work? It's like, how does art work?
Let's not get into
stop right there.
Here. Yeah, let's not get into tarot yet. I want to get farther down into the nuts and bolts here. It's a little easier to see in Chinese zodiac, but we'll continue for a moment. So what human beings were doing for millions of years, literally, was looking up at the stars and projecting on those stars images. And people accepted those projections, and unconsciously, through the collective unconscious, there tended to develop an agreement about what these things meant. And so the result is that what looking at the astrological map really does is it allows you to look at the astrological map that is in the unconscious, and which was human projections over millions of years until they started to grow together and be general agreement. So if we look at the Chinese zodiac as an example of this, if you go to a Chinese restaurant, sometimes they'll give you a placemat that has the Chinese zodiac on it with a little description of what your year means. And very often, and certainly true for me, you'll find a really uncanny description of the way you are in life. And this is how the Chinese went about doing it with a 12-year cycle, and said, well, people that are born in this year must be like this. But they did this over probably 100,000 years at least, maybe more. And so, gradually it became truer and truer through the collective unconscious, to the point where today it actually is true.
And I even, in my book the companion book that goes with the tarot deck, called it the inner solar system. Yeah. So there's basically a mirror image of the universe within you, and it's how those magnetic connections affect you. And I think even at a finer grain, we have 4 personalities through the year. It's like a garden. We change with the seasons, and that's why people say when you meet someone, make sure you know them for a year before you, because you have to go through the cycles of the garden of the person. And so then the Chinese astrology is going through the cycles of the garden relative to animal personalities, which are easy to get. I mean, you see a rat, you see a tiger, you're going to have a donkey, a ram. You're going to have an immediate unconscious intuitive hit as to what that feels to you. And it's generational. I mean, they're playing more of the cycles of, this year rather than this day. And it makes it really clear with the Chinese zodiac how things, not only history repeats itself, it's orbital history. It's not a mistake to repeat everything, but there are things, revolutions. Just look at RPMs in an engine, but if you slow it down, 1, 2, it's like the Ouroboros. It's one cycle that completed and bit its tail to make consciousness. Right.
And so I wish I had known this when I was 21, because I knew my ex-wife for just over 1 year before we were married. And, that was all pleasant enough. And the typical movements of love and so on. But I remember one of the worst weeks of my life was the week before my wedding. And I went on leave. I had completed the basic school. I took my gear out to Fort Sill, where I was going to go in artillery training. And then I flew back to Buffalo, which is where my ex-wife was living. And that week of her anxiety about her forthcoming marriage and getting the event correct was just awful from my point of view. Her anxiety level was way up at the top of the scale, and I should have paid attention because she couldn't handle that anxiety.
Well, and you're coming from a crisis. In crisis, perform more acutely, more intensely. You consolidate in crisis, and then crisis, she was being blown apart.
Yeah.
So the personalities are absolutely not. They're not compatible. It's a rock to one another.
Right. And ultimately, I couldn't. I found in my marriage. I mean, I stuck with her for 17 years, but I just found I couldn't live with that anxiety level and had to calm things down. But all right, so we're in the Lord's Prayer. Where are we?
Yeah, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread. So we're asking to find a way to be fed.
There's the metaphor of manna right there.
Right. And obviously every living human being somehow gets fed every day. And they find a way. And if they don't, they die. So give us this day our daily bread. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Boy, do we ever need our unconscious to do that. Don't lead me into the red light district of the city. Deliver me from that evil, because.
Well, lead us not into temptation. What's coming to mind was it Orpheus and Penelope, where don't be tempted to look back. Yeah. Trust that she's there. And deliver me from evil. Well, yeah, but then you lost her because you looked back and she was pulled back and disintegrated. I mean, so there's that story that goes in those lines too, of trusting your intuition.
Yeah. So delivery.
Forgive me for
my debts and
my sins, and as I forgive others, I think.
Yeah, as I forgive others, because everybody makes sins at one point or another.
And there's a relationship there with being reciprocal, epic spiral of giving and receiving, that you can't just expect to be forgiven yours, and then you're just everyone's good at something, but some people are just good at being asked.
Yeah, and Christ comes upon this crowd that's about to stone a prostitute, and he says, let he who has committed no sin cast the first stone.
Yeah, and, shut that right down.
And so he got that one, and so for that is the power and the glory forever. So yes, it is the power and the glory forever. But when you're dead, I mean, the key fear of the human being is the fear of death, and what will happen then. And a friend of mine who was a Turkish novelist once said, when you're dead, you don't know you're dead it's only difficult for your family.
Yeah.
When you're stupid, it works the same way.
Same way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like funny too. Mark Twain was asked, are you afraid of death? He goes, oh, by all means, no. I was dead for billions of years before I was born, and it affected me not at all.
Yeah. And so there's nothing to fear there.
Right.
In death, we'll all succeed, as the Buddhist monks say. Don't worry about death, you will all succeed with it.
Yeah, life is fatal.
Yeah,
Life is fatal. We're not getting out alive.
Right. You therefore have to find a way to live. And if you want to be immortal and to be remembered, you have to do it in this life. Figure out what it is that you're going to do that makes you immortal and not forget.
And I resonate with the parallel paths that you and I took over this last year. It's interesting that, that we came together. We almost couldn't have been more different. And at the same time, there's the same kind of process we both went through in a whole different context for completely almost different reasons, but we both created something out of alleged torment or trouble. I mean,
right.
And it's, reach into the alluvium to pull out the gold, and then let the other stuff wash down the river.
Yeah. And, it's worth going back into the Lord's Prayer to remember the passage, give us this day our daily bread. And just remember how true that is, because everybody, it's a petition to your unconscious to find what you need to eat to survive. And we all need to eat something. And so even in the most impoverished circumstances in Somalia or wherever, you may not have enough to eat, but everybody's finding something. Everybody's finding some morsel, even if you're starved and starving to death. I mean, and that petition is imperative. If you're not finding it, you're in trouble. Right?
Well, yeah, and give us this day. That means in the present, be present. So if that's a mantra, if that's a meditation, like even like counting the rosary, the discipline of the ritual, or let's pull discipline of the ritual. There's the give us this day, not tomorrow, not yesterday, now, in the present, where then you're not living in the anxiety of avoidance in the future by never even getting to the problem. You're not living in the anxiety of the past by dwelling on the problem. You're living, not the problem, you're living your life, and then problems can come your way, and some ducked, dodged, moved, some solved, some tossed out as being irrelevant. I mean, so that discernment piece, give us this day, and that power of now, or presenteeism kind of piece, or present, not presenteeism.
Right. So to the YouTube audience, let me ask what questions you'd like us to address for a few more minutes here. And if no questions come up or no comments that are worthy of our comment, then we will pass on to our next life. Whatever that will be. So give us some more questions. Or Jordan, do you have other things that have been stimulated by this discussion?
I like the word marginalian brings up an important, I think, mode of being, where just because someone wrote something, I mean, some people find it sacrilege to write in books, but I find it to be a discussion with the author. And especially if they're dead and gone, as a historical friend, but just writing in the margins, just marginalia in life, where you're reading deeply the words, which means you're listening deeply without talking. And then afterwards, the space opens up for you to pour in your response. So I find that when something is read, don't read it for, oh, this is gospel. Read it and simply read it, and then respond rather than react. So I feel our own personal marginalia when someone's spouting something that makes so much sense, but you're like, but that doesn't feel right. We'll own that and honor it, I think, because you have then marginalia in your life that's just a response to something that's been crafted, strategized, put together, authored kind of thing. That's just a comment back to marginalia.
Yeah. So I put a link on the YouTube channel. The early part of this session was based on today's post from the Marginalian, previously Brain Pickings by Maria Popova. So if you Google her name, unfortunately, I have that on my cell phone, so it's not so easy to get it onto this YouTube chat. But if you Google Maria Popova, or
not Papova,
Popova, Popova, and it's Marian. I spelled it Mario, but it's Marian, not Mario.
So any questions on the YouTube chat?
I'm not seeing anything at the moment. So anyway,
I think the next thing that comes up for me is Jung's comment of you can't mislive your life, which means you don't have a life sentence based on everything that came before. You know, it's not even, especially your mistakes. And to me, mistakes are OFLs. They're opportunities for learning. If you take the shame out of them, you don't get killed up on point, you know, in battle. I mean, you're doing recon, and just don't worry about mistakes. You don't have time for that monkey business. You have time to live and to see and to report back in, you know, and
absolutely.
And if you don't report back in, it's because you're dead. Well, then that's not a mistake, and you did what you're doing. I mean, but I think that you can't mislive your life is so terribly important and so intensely meaningful for people to get out of the feeling of original sin. There is absolutely no reason I should feel guilty about being born. That's really what original sin does. I mean, there's none.
That's what the church wanted you to feel, that
and that's just crowd control.
You were guilty, and that would be crowd control.
And that keeps everyone keeping their head down.
Right.
Yeah, scare the tar out of you. Keeps everyone keeping their head down, and then salt and pepper it with a bunch of monkey business news all the time about trauma, and you keep people basically in an active state of paralysis. Is really what you have.
Right. And it's actually kind of what our politicians have succeeded in doing to us in the United States, where the politicians are afraid to move past where we are now. And so they're constantly pulling apart. And, you know, that's the basic definition of neurosis, that you can't choose between one and the other, and there's no solution to it per se. I mean, maybe some of us look at the television and say, oh, well, if Trump goes to prison or something, that we will be saved.
No, or he gets locked out of his own pay-for site. He gets locked out of his own pay-for site, so he has no one else to bitch at.
Right.
Or bitch to.
Right.
He got sent to his room, basically.
Right. And so the point of our current affairs is exactly the point of our lives, which is you have to find the conjunctio, the place where you can hold the opposites consciously. Okay, so that means it means in your life that maybe there's something that you don't like about what your wife did today, but oh, by the way, you have to live your life with this woman, so or not. Obviously 50% of us don't for some reason with this woman or man. And I think a lot of women leave men because they're immature, and with good reason. Now, do those men gain maturity when they leave that first wife? Yes, assuredly. But it doesn't save that particular marriage. But we could save those marriages if we were able to hold the opposites in consciousness all the time, which I can say that that's true with my ex-wife, because I still love her. I'm proud of the 3 daughters that we at least started to raise together, and which actually we have raised together, because I've stayed in touch with all of my daughters and with my ex-wife, and I still love her. I love her as a sister, though not as a spouse. And so,
well, and people, I was going to say that the immaturity of the male. I think 15, 20 years ago, the average age of a male leaving adolescence was 28, which is about 11 years too long, and maybe even 15 years too long. And the rite of passage is not being in culture are primarily causative to that, where people don't even know that they're supposed to. Child become the parent of the adults, child become the parent of the man, of the woman. But what's interesting to me too, is in those situations, there's also not discernment to follow through on what you feel about something. Because I love the example of, here's how apology does and doesn't work. So I want you to take a plate and I want you to throw it on the tile floor and watch it shatter. Now, I want you to apologize to the plate. Did it fix it? No. It's broken. It's multiple pieces. And there's then you have to fix the vessel with golden lacquer. Chinese, the Japanese art of a pot or vessel is better for having been broken, because then instead of scars between the pieces, there are multiple perspectives. And instead of fractures and fissures, there are golden connections. But they break that plate. When you say, I'm sorry, that's the same thing that happens in a relationship. The words aren't what's there. It's how you address what just occurred.
Yep. Yeah. And so for everyone out there who is about to enter a relationship or is in one that is troubled, the whole idea of Jungian psychology is to bring these opposites together. And it's exactly what we need in the United States right now, which is a conjunctio between these red and blue ideas. And, that's why I tend to wear either a green shirt or, a green shirt, which represents nature, or a purple shirt if I can. I don't, because I still have in my inventory some, power blue shirts and that sort of thing. I do sometimes wear those as well, but I don't buy those anymore. I look for purple or green shirts. And it's to be symbolic of the fact that we can't, we're not going to have a successful country if we continue to keep this neurosis going. So we have to turn back. And I thought it was very, very interesting that yesterday in the Army-Navy game, the West Pointers were wearing jerseys that said across the back, instead of the name of the player, they said "United We Stand." And I thought that was very, very interesting.
Nice.
That they did that. And, you know, I'm really proud of West Point for having come up with that.
That's a wonderful gesture.
Yeah, because it says it's not about in a team game like that, it's not about the individual. It's about, you know, about being united to try to win the game. And of course, they came very close. I mean, they came within actually one play of winning the game, which often happens in that game. It's often a very close game and closely.
Well, and you mentioned all the trick plays, and without the names on the back, most of the other people probably they don't know the numbers maybe. And so they're looking for the names. And so they get all messed up because they have to relearn who to follow. And if someone sets up in a formation that's different from the standard that they're used to, I mean, that made for some good strategy just for even the trick plays to be pushed in there too.
Yeah. And there's also one reason why the result wasn't that strange. And that was, even though Army had an 8-3 record and the Navy had a 3-8 record, you know, the betting people were believing that Navy would lose because the performance of the teams looked so different in that statistic. But there's quite a difference in the teams that the two schools play. Because, for example, every year Navy plays Notre Dame. Now, why does Navy play a Big Ten school like Notre Dame?
Right.
Do you know why?
No, I don't.
Because in 1941, Notre Dame was going bankrupt, and the brothers who were running the college went to the Navy and asked them to put a Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps program at Notre Dame. And whoever was in charge of the Navy at that time, or this decision, saying, "Oh yeah, we'll do that. We'll give you an NROTC unit if you promise to play Navy every year." And this is back.
Really?
Yeah, and this is back in the time when you know, Newt Rockne had been famous for the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame, right? And so Notre Dame was always a powerhouse going way, way back. And so the Navy wanted to make sure that the team had to play Notre Dame every year, and got to. And so that's why it's done. And I think now Notre Dame also plays Army. But you know, what Notre Dame does is really kind. Let's say it's kind, because a few years back, they played in Ireland. They played the Notre Dame Navy game in Ireland, and at the end of the first half, Navy is ahead. But the reason that Navy is ahead at the end of the first half is because Notre Dame uses the game as a scrimmage for their third string. and so they give all the Navy fans something
a head start,
to cheer
kind of,
about, right? A little head start, and then they put the first string in to come and put the thumb down, right?
Right.
And so in all the years since then, I think Navy's only won twice, and one of those years was the year that Staubach won the Heisman Trophy, and he was a midshipman. And
yeah, I grew up on Staubach.
Yeah, And
that was back when the Cowboys had dynasty, and now the 1 star starts to become more of a Yelp rating.
yeah. So anyway, so that's why. And so the last team that Navy played before Army was Cincinnati, and I noticed that Cincinnati is number 4 in the country, and is in the big playoff for number 1 in the country in the next couple of weeks. And Navy nearly beat them, and nearly beat several other pretty good teams. But the roster of the teams that Navy plays is very tough, and so. And honestly, in the Army-Navy game, the only game that counts for the coach is whether he wins Army-Navy. So the coach of Navy has run up quite a string, because he's been in there, I think 14 years now, and he's, of the 14 years, he's won 11 of them.
Wow.
Or yeah, or maybe it's 10, but 10 against 4. And so he just got renewed yesterday.
Yeah, so every year he does the next best thing once,
Right,
and then that's what.
That's right. So all the Navy cares about is that Navy gets on the television a lot, because we play Notre Dame and we play Cincinnati and play other teams, but in the end, we may lose those games, but if we beat Army, that counts. And that's a successful season. So anyway, let me just look back and see what we're getting now, because we are getting a bunch of things.
And I will say the 1 star Yelp rating for the Cowboys, I still like the Cowboys. So I just laughed that I grew up on we were going to go to the Super Bowl every year. It was just, you get Tarkenton, Staubach, Stabler. You had, and I can't remember the 4th name, but it's from the Raiders back then. But there were like 4 dominant dynasty teams.
So Miles has an interesting point here. He says, bringing up the Lord's Prayer is a complexity for me. Too much to articulate and then pose a question about it. Too much to type. But pastors who I respect say that it is superseded by the resurrection. This session has me going deeper than what these pastors say. Well, good, Miles. We've achieved our purpose. And from Texas says, is America becoming politically schizophrenic? Well, that's actually,
I don't think becoming it already is.
Yeah.
There's no becoming about it.
That's really old news.
Yeah, it's Texas, deep in the swim.
Because Lewis Powell, who became a Supreme Court justice, wrote a letter in about 1973 to the Chamber of Commerce, laying out the strategy that the GOP should follow for the future. And they have done. And the result is that we have a neurotic, it's not schizophrenic, that would be that would be a mental disease or defect that we cannot necessarily resolve, but we are certainly a neurotic country, in that we're either pulling to the right or pulling to the left. And what we need to do is find a way to pull to the center. And also
it's kind of like a King in the Mountain game. But hey kids, it's getting dark, time to go home. You got to give it a rest. And so the multiple personalities of whoever's on the top of the mountain at a given day, and then taken down 3 days later because whatever they did 3 years ago. I mean,
right. And so our friend Diane Shamam is here.
Oh, nice.
And says, great session, thanks. Just in case,
Thank you.
drop by. He came in late and he's leaving early.
Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, and then Miles says, the Lord's Prayer is superseded, but still must be heeded. What do you think of the position of there is no salvation by our works? Should anyone care about creating something here to be immortal? Well, yes, it seems to me that you should care about leaving something behind that people will care about. It's not, you're not going to be remembered well if you're Al Capone. He's certainly immortal, but nonetheless, you're not going to get very far. Let me just,
to Miles' question, I need to find the title of an article I wrote this summer, but it's about not having any concern whatsoever with salvation. That just, to me, is a higher form of crowd control of shame. But I think the title was Dump Your Salvation. Hold on, let me get the title. But it was a concept to me that was the larger scale version of Make Shame Walk the Plank, where salvation is another lie. It's like, that's like nirvana, except it's not going to be attainable.
Right. So, and
which is the devil's bargain.
Jung makes an equivalence of salvation with individuation. Mm-hmm. Okay, where we are saved if we individuate and see both sides and can hold the conjunctio in our hand rather than going too far to one side or the other side. If we individuate, we're going to be much more successful, and our society will too. So
agreed. And I also think too that the idea of the individuation is something to accomplish. Yes, there is that, but there's also a certain goallessness to it, where you are always complete at any given time, never finished, lifelong. So you're there now, just wherever you are. And the article I wrote was Strip Yourself of Salvation. And what it was is to take out this carrot that's hanging in front of you, that's tied to your head on this twig or a branch, and actually find the impetus within to actually move yourself.
Right. So I'll just read this one paragraph of Jung's, which sums up these words, and also it talks about the neurosis of intelligent patients. So we'll take as a given that everybody here is intelligent. You managed to work your way onto YouTube after all, and you've got a computer in front of you, presumably. So I'll just read this one paragraph, which sums it all up. Although all this sounds as if it were a sort of theological speculation, it is in reality modern man's perplexity expressed in symbolic terms. Okay, so if you're a modern person, it is the problem I so often had to deal with in treating the neuroses of intelligent patients. So we've been talking about red and blue being a neurosis. Well, there are many neuroses that we can have privately too. Okay, so in treating the neuroses of intelligent patients, it can be expressed in a more scientific, psychological language. For instance, instead of using the term God, you say unconscious. Instead of Christ, self. Instead of incarnation, integration of the unconscious. Instead of salvation or redemption, individuation. instead of crucifixion or sacrifice on the cross, realization of the four functions or of wholeness. I think it is no disadvantage to religious tradition if we can see how far it coincides with psychological experience. On the contrary, it seems to me a most welcome aid in understanding religious traditions. And so you can achieve wholeness when you can hold red and blue in both hands. Okay. And if we in the country demand that we hold red and blue in our two hands, and at the same time consciously, then we're going to be all right. So, for example, the state of Kentucky did not vote for Biden for president, but nonetheless, the Federal Emergency Management Agency is going to Kentucky to help with the tornado damage. And that's the kind of reconciliation and conjunctio that we need in order to have a country.
There's a both and the dignity and difference.
And I have a dear friend that lives in Frankfort, Kentucky, the capital of the state of Kentucky. And I'm sure if I drove out to meet her and her husband, I would find that the gas stations are pretty much the same all the way out there, that the restaurants and Greasy Spoons all the way out there are pretty much the same as anywhere else. And the drugstores and grocery stores are pretty much the same. And I do know that, if I travel to another state and I have a prescription that I need to draw from a drugstore, I can draw that prescription anywhere in the United States. It's not limited by state. And so, we do have a united country in very many ways. The only time the country isn't united is when you turn on cable news. So don't do that to yourself.
Yeah. And one thing I noticed, someone asked me, it's like, do you watch the news? I was like, I scan every once in a while, but I realized it's pretty much, I don't fill up my car with gas every day. I don't need to. I get down to half a tank, we'll fill it back up. It's better for the engine. I look at the news about as often as I fill my gas tank. So, and that's about, to me, appropriate. Find the big picture pieces, things that are meaningful. Otherwise, I go to PBS or YouTube and I watch something on animals or Egypt or who knows what. But the news to me it's not journalism anymore. So it's not like I'm missing any intelligent awareness. In fact, I'm just missing having to have the static chatter trauma BS of it.
It's tabloid.
We used to call this the National Enquirer.
Right. So now it's on television and we subject ourselves to that stuff. But the reality is that nothing much changes. People know when they've been had, and
well, and look at Mark Twain again. 100 years ago, he says, if you don't read the newspaper every morning, you're uninformed. But if you do, you're misinformed. So that hadn't changed in over that amount of time. And that's still stable. It's just now it's a bunch of gossip. And I mean, I don't know. Facts don't need adjectives. So to me, alternative facts aren't facts. That's opinion. Truth, love, and facts don't need adjectives. I mean, so.
Okay, so Miles says that apparently 100 billion of us have passed through this place, most moved into obscurity, but nevertheless just do the next right thing and don't care if anyone notices. Well, yeah, sure. I mean, how much does any of even the most famous and holy people, how much influence do they have on your life, right? You know, if you go to the grocery store, it, you know, is the passion of Jesus Christ of importance there? You know, yeah, maybe in certain ways, but you know,
in the Apple section.
something like that. And
well, I like that comment from Miles because, for example, in my work, I'm there to do a session of value, and oftentimes I mean, with non-repeat clients, I don't know how it opened up into their life. I mean, and there's a lot of times I've found out no news is good news. I mean, I'll get a postcard 10 years later. You said this.
Yeah, and
I don't even remember.
Yeah, people, yes, people tend to get overly into whether you're famous or not.
Yeah,
and,
I don't.
You know,
Yeah.
for almost everyone, and this goes out to multiple decimal points. You know, there is probably someone. I mean, there are ancestors in our ancestry that we have no idea what name they had, starting with single-celled organisms. They did two things successfully. They survived until they reproduced. That's all they did. But they are immortal in our lives because if any of them had failed in those two things, we wouldn't be here.
Yeah, and I'll say too, to respect back to Miles' comment, I know even in the last year, there was no more working for notoriety, no more popularity stats, no more, you know, who's the prom king, no more trying to impress the parents, no more trying to impress anyone. It's do my work in a way that resonates with value to me. Otherwise, it's meaningless for me to do it because then I'm basically a slave of people who I don't even know what they want.
Yeah.
And
so
the futility of that. Yeah.
And so in terms of Miles's point about, you know, immortality, you know, you don't know what wave you will press forward into society that will change the world in some way. You know, you don't know what gift. I mean, something that Jordan and I say today could impress one of you, and one of you might be hearing it a decade from now because it's being recorded and it will be on the YouTube channel. And so you might hear it a decade from now when we're speaking it, and it might influence you in a special way that causes you to do something that's unbelievable and that's incredibly valuable to humanity. Who knows? I can't know now and I can't know then probably, but anyway.
You know, one of the most moving experiences I've ever had, where I had so much gratitude and just so much feeling. For a couple summers in college, I taught martial arts to underprivileged kids in a university program when I'd go back home. And it's called YOU, Youth Opportunities Unlimited. And they would scholarship sponsor inner city kids from around the state of Texas to come up to North Texas in this program. And they would repeat the classes that they either failed or even did well in over the summer so they get more time to learn. And what's interesting is at first, I mean, I remember the chairman saying, now, why are we teaching street kids how to fight? What's this martial arts thing? I said, have you seen them fight? It's really sloppy. I mean, but there was this one 13-year-old girl, and she was quiet, highly observant, but never said a word, not one word. And 17 years later, she is 30. I receive a postcard It brought me to tears. She said, I have my own company and I'm about to open another office. I have 35 employees because you said, do it and keep it like clay. And I didn't even remember saying that. It must have just popped out in but that stuck with her. And 17 years later, I get this thankful, most impassioned postcard. And I mean, I canceled my meetings for the rest of the day. I mean, I was just, the life was welling up. I mean, the tears were more just like sacred adornments, because I realized this person in the class who I knew was there 17 years later, I had no idea.
Right.
And so it wasn't for notoriety. It was just that thing felt appropriate that day and of value to say to that class at that time. And I synced up and it synced her up. She took it and she took this raw material and she made something out of it.
Well, and so therefore, we shouldn't be thinking in terms of famous personages. Right. For example, okay, Christ or Buddha or Beethoven or anybody else that we may know today, because 1,000 years from now, when all of our DNA will have interacted once again many times, there may be a ripple going down the generations that we don't remember, that nobody remembers our name, whatever, it came from us, but it becomes the most important thing in the development of humanity. Who can say? We can't say. And certainly Christ didn't know where his sacrifice would end, and he was committed to it. His angel told him that this is the way for you, but he certainly doesn't know the impact he's had on people's lives. And so I wouldn't worry about notoriety in your lifetime. Anything that you do, including how you make an omelet or a dinner, for example, might be the most important thing for humanity as it ripples down through the ages. And you just don't know.
And being present and just being present. I mean, even for example, the bonfires on Bent Street here in Taos last night. They had pozole and coffee and chocolate coffee and elixirs and food and drinks, and it was all free. I read the whole evening and I covered my sign with the price and just put free, and just covered it up. And people, the chair was probably one of the warmest places. It was only open to the cold as people got up and someone else sat down. But it was such a beautiful experience because you meet all these people. It's a huge crowd. Everyone's smiling. It was such the holiday spirit. And
that's a brilliant thing to do.
Yeah. And it wasn't even, I didn't even have the words community service or it's good to give back. It was, I'm so happy to be part of this experience.
Yeah. That's a brilliant thing to do. And you never know it, things in the tarot do move the unconscious in ways that we can't predict. And it could be that one of those readings would become the most important thing to humanity 1,000 years from now, and no one will remember it was you or it was done in Taos, but nonetheless it's an idea that generated other ideas
and it was 24 to 28 degrees. I mean, so everyone's bundled up. It's cold. And I'm glad I had a little fire there. I mean, but I had on my lambskin Sherpa shirt, so I was cool. But at the same time, people, not one person said it's cold. everyone, it's like there was a warmth of community besides even the bonfires. And you realize later it's mostly the bonfires keeping everyone there. But at the same time, it was just such a beautiful event to see that much culture too, because they started out with a kachina dance ritual from an actual kachina dancers, and a hollowed out conch shell that they called everyone in like a horn. And it was just so wonderfully put together and natural and fun.
Terrific,
meaningful.
Terrific.
So
just in case, we'll wrap it up on this. Just in case says, some evenings ago, I was reminded about nature when I ran out of dry firewood, exactly as we got a terrible snow blizzard. When I woke up this morning, my coffee from the evening before was frozen. That seems cold.
That's
cold. All right. So stay warm, everyone. Enjoy the holiday season. And thank you, Jordan, for
definitely
chatting with me. See you next week.
Sounds good.